Welcome to another episode of the Understanding Ultra podcast, the podcast that likes to ask the question, why? We aim to give you the insights from the top ultra runners and trail runners from around the world, the people that work in the trail industry, and everybody else. We dive into training, nutrition, mindset, and racing strategies to help you to become the best ultra runner that you can be. So without further ado, let's speak to our next guest. So, Ben Weeks, welcome to Understanding Ultra. Thanks for coming on.
You're very welcome. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, no problem. Now, obviously, we're here tonight to talk about the amazing world record that you've just set when you and Vic.
Yeah.
But before we dive into all of that, I wanted to just ask you just to say a few words about yourself. Tell the listeners and the viewers how you firstly got into running and then how you got into this subculture of barefoot running within that.
Yeah, so I guess how did I get into running? I think I've sort of all the way through school sort of run and been part of cross country and all that sort of stuff amongst a whole bunch of other things, rugby, etc. I had an attempt at a re-engaged rugby career. I lived in Canada for, about 10 years? I think 12 years. I was stateside for about 12 years in total, and I think 10 of those were in Canada, as memory serves. I'm getting quite old now, apparently. I engaged in what was known, obviously, as a beer league. Did that. I was married to someone at that time, and it all just seemed a little. I think I was sort of mid-30s at the time. There were some life commitments and all that sort of stuff, and in order to continue some level of fitness, kind of fell into running when rugby kind of wasn't like 2 days a week, which was proving a bit of a challenge. And I signed up to do a couple of 10Ks initially. I did a couple of half marathons. So I did what was known as the Angus Glen half marathon and then the Mississauga marathon. This is all around Toronto in Canada. And then got into a sort of accidentally through a client, got into a running group that wasn't terribly far from me, and then they started talking about a run called the Around the Bay 30K, which is based in Hamilton, Ontario, and is largely considered to be older than Boston as a marathon over in stateside. So I went off and trained to do that. And the difficulty with the Around the Bay is that you run around one of the sort of sub bays of Lake Ontario, but it's done in March, so roughly this time of year. And in Canada, the weather, and especially with lake effect snow, can be pretty arduous, and you have to train for it during the course of the Canadian winter. So I think some of the training runs that I was doing at the time, a couple of them were in minus 20 degrees and all that sort of stuff. So I think that was really sort of that was when the sort of the blinkers were taken off, and actually I quite enjoyed the running. I quite enjoyed the mental aspect of planning out your runs and all that sort of stuff, and I think it sort of snowballed, forgive the pun, but I think it kind of snowballed after that. I had a couple of years of sort of off years, I guess, before returning back to the UK in 2013. And obviously I was slightly dormant, I guess, when my son was born, and just sort of fell into a sort of a standard pattern. And then we got a dog. So I've got a black Labrador. And when he turned 12 months, which is when you're typically allowed to start running with them, he became the catalyst for getting back into running. And that's essentially where it's all come from. In terms of the subculture of barefoot running, after the Around the Bay, I think I was running in New Balance at the time, and I went to the local running shop and was looking for a new pair of shoes because I think the current ones just weren't comfortable. And I was my eye was caught with a New Balance, what are they called, Nimbus? This is about 10, 15 years ago. Nimbus 10 or something, or Minimus 10 as I've served them. So I found those, tried them out. They were mentioned as being sort of barefoot or minimalist shoes in inverted commas. Tried them on, liked the look of them. It wasn't particularly calculated, liked the sensation of sort of walking around the shop in them, bought them, and that was essentially it. I don't think I've really worn any other type of trainer since then, and I've then subsequently shifted to Five Fingers, which I generally run in, and then I've flirted with. I've run in sort of Merrill vapor gloves and all that sort of stuff. So essentially, I've sort of variations of the same theme because I like the ground feedback from all that sort of stuff. So yeah, that's pretty much where it's come from. And the actual barefoot stuff.
It's not been a.
Go on.
Sorry, I was just going to say it's not been an overnight thing, because there was always that thing in running, in trail running, and when people decided they want to have a go at barefoot running, that they just instantly have a go at it and then end up injuring themselves. With you, it's been a consistent thing that you've done over years.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't overbearingly calculated. It was just I felt comfortable in the shoe, and that's what I've sort of chosen to run in. If it's not broke, don't fix it, right, is the old adage. And so I've sort of, yes, so bottom line is, over the last 15 years, I think 15, 16 years, then I've just generally run in those shoes with a very brief period where I was getting some. So we lived down in Wiltshire, and we used to live, before we moved to where we are now, like on one of the outer reaches of Salisbury Plain, and I was having some issues and went to a running shop, and they go, "Oh, you want to try these Ultra Mountains? So they're zero drop, they're quite flat, but they've got a bit more cushioning in them." So I tried those for about 6 months, but I didn't really get on with them, and then sort of fell back into the Five Fingers and all that sort of stuff, and I was sort of off to the races at that point. And again, sort of, forgive the pun, but yeah.
I know that was something that was recommended to me a few years back. So then I made the switch to zero drop, and I know a lot of people struggle with it because they're so used to big drops on shoes. I found it quite a reasonably okay transition for me to go to ultras, and I've always stuck with them. And I know that although sometimes I use the ones with the bigger soles on for long ultras, I find most comfortable in the ones that they class as the more minimal ones for like in shorter distances, because I can feel, because you get that feel, don't you, with your toes spreading, and you get that feel of what you're actually standing on. You can actually feel it through the shoes without it damaging your feet. You can feel it, and you feel more. I describe it as almost like having a second pair of hands, because you can feel what you're actually standing on, rather than like a dull sensation. So but something that for me, I've got friends, quite a few friends that have sort of said you want to try it, you want to have a go at it, and I think it's coming off another injury this year. I think I am give it another.
I mean, a lot of people. Go. It was funny. Are you familiar with a guy called Gary House? He's a peak runner. I think he's based over in Wales, and I think he's very. We were engaged in. I think someone asked him a question about whether he would go barefoot, and he goes, "Well, I wear the Vivo trainers, but he doesn't actually train in them because of based on sort of the pace that he's running and all that sort of stuff." And I don't know. I'm not going to get onto sort of a soap. I think there was a sort of an agreement of sort of agreeing to disagree in that to a certain extent, because
I think knowing him, knowing his social media posts, I think he just likes to disagree with everybody.
Yeah. Well, I don't object to that. I mean, I'm not offended by it. It was a nice line of conversation, and he he reminded me that he was in touch at the very early stages of when Vivo came out, sort of being part of the development side of things. It was just an interesting conversation that sometimes you can fall into it and just it's all or nothing. And I think it's sort of adapting your shoe choice to the situation that you're in. Although I might be on the cusp of just sort of being a bit preachy about the barefoot style. I just, I don't know.
But if that's something that works, if it's something that works for you, then naturally that's what you talk about, and people will. So social media is, it's a polarizing thing, and it can be black and white at times.
Yeah.
If you've got an opinion, but you know that works for you, and you know that it works for a load of your mates, then you will talk about it. So that's fair enough. I think there's a lot of time people tend to just shut people down straight away if they think they know better. But if you're the person that knows for yourself, then you know better than anybody, don't you?
Yeah. And I've never sort of taken a sort of although I sort of half alluded to it, I've never particularly taken a soapbox moment on the stuff. If you're interested in barefoot running, I will, and you're happy to ask a question, then I'll answer your question in the ways that and there's been 2 or 3 people. So I've got a mate of mine that just before the world record that we'll get onto came about, was starting to probe about sort of Vibram 5 fingers because he'd had injuries and all that sort of stuff, and what my recommendation was, and so on and so forth. And I simply shared what was working for me, and if he fancied giving it a go, then he can give it a go, but transition gently. Don't sort of do it straight away. Sort of do a couple of miles and switch back to your old shoes and all that sort of stuff, because there can be people will respond to them differently. It's not. There's a lot of people that have responded to them and been all consuming, and that's great. But you want to just take your time with it before you sort of dive in at the deep end, as it were.
Yeah, and that works the other way as well, because I know that having years of running ultras in 0 drop, I got taken into the dark side with some carbon plated shoes for race, and dive straight into that, thinking, oh, these feel great, they're really springy. I did an ultra in them, and they were great. They performed exactly how I wanted them to.
Yeah.
And so it made me use them more. But then I realised that actually it just instantly changed my biomechanics overnight, going from 0 drop to whatever. I can't remember what they are, what the drop is on them, but it's fairly hefty. And although I didn't feel it at the time, it took a couple of months for the effects of it to come out, and it came out in an injury. So dropping back into 0 drops for me, it felt like going back into flip-flops again. But you fall back into it after a few weeks, you're back to where you were again. So I think you're absolutely right. It's something, and that's something that people need to be aware of, isn't it? That if they're going to try something new, that it's a gradual thing. Like you've had years and years of trying different areas of it and getting into it to the point where you now can go out and run a half marathon every day for a month barefoot. That is, so we're on to the world record now. So tell us about how this record came about, the genesis of it.
So myself, Vic Owens, who is the happy runner, North Wales, but it's NW on her feed, a chap called Case Lewis, who is the first known person to do the barefoot 3 Peaks challenge in the traditional way. So the 3 Peaks challenge, where you obviously go up Snowdon, Ben Nevis and Scarfell Pike, but you drive between the 3 sites. And he's the first one to have ever done, first known person to have done that barefooted. And another chap who is I don't know whether he's, I don't want to insult him. So his name's Damien. He is known as Rewilding Dad, and he is just a protagonist of the barefoot movement. The 4 of us just kind of bonded and created this community called, cards on the table. I started it by my Instagram feed during lockdown, turning around and I pushing the barefoot thing and barefoot running and all this sort of stuff. And I started picking up, or at least the algorithm started thrusting like sandal wearing runners into my face. And I was a bit like, sandals? Really? I mean, your skin is going to be exposed in sandals anyway. It's so close to just going barefoot. Why wouldn't you just sack off the sandals, which I generally have not. I guess I generally have, it's not an aversion to sandals particularly. I don't wear them much. I wear a sort of almost like during the summer months, I've got some Vivo Abus, I can never pronounce the bloody name of them, but Abus leather, which are sort of a closed toe shoe, but they're quite light and all that sort of stuff. And that's what I wear anyhow. All this came about. I punted a post onto Instagram saying, do you know what? I keep on seeing stuff about the sandals and running completely barefoot. I'm going to give it a go. And I'm going to give it a go on this date and all that sort of stuff. And if anyone fancies joining me, how about it? And that snowballed into what has been known as has become the Barefoot Crew 5K. Damien, Case, Vic and myself all got on board, and she's got quite a big account because of the nature of the mad, forgive my language, shit that she's done. And I would say this to her face. I mean, she's intense as an individual and someone that I have on a pedestal for what she's been able to achieve. But it was just the four of us collaborated quite nicely. And so every Thursday, everyone comes out and barefoots for whatever distance they choose. You can run, walk, or go, to a minimum of sort of, not a minimum, but you can go anything up to a 5K. If you fundamentally want to go beyond, that's up to you. You know yourself. If you want to walk a mile, then you can walk a mile, and it all just sort of snowballed. So over the last year, it's grown to a sort of 3,000 account following and all that sort of stuff. And we have sort of maybe 100 people that come out every Thursday and just go off and experience being completely barefooted. Anyhow, that then fast tracking away from that, Damien had pre-booked to run Dorney Lake marathon in October of last year. And as we got to know each other, this was mentioned and brought up. And then the four of us said, well, wouldn't it be fun if we all barefoot the whole thing and all come together and do this run? So that essentially is what happened. I've gotten into strength training, like for running. I'd never really been much of I've been a strength trainer in different guises, but I'd never been a strength trainer for running. So I'd sort of done a little bit. So I was quite wired and I'd lost quite a bit of weight and all that sort of stuff. Did the marathon. At the end of the marathon, was so thrilled at how well everything performed. I mean, I was fatigued, as anyone would be at the end of a sort of a 42 kilometre or 26.2 mile distance, that I think I'd said to Vic, I'd be quite interested in trying something else or something to that effect. And about sort of 2 months later, she calls or sends me a text message and goes, here, how do you fancy tackling this? And she mentioned this barefoot marathon, the world record. So there is one set. There is one set for a male, which is the most consecutive barefoot. So the most barefoot half marathons in a month, and the most consecutive barefoot half marathons in a month. She presented these ideas. The current record holder, I can't remember his name off the top of my head, is based in Florida, had set it in some point in, I think, May of 21, and had set the limit at 20 as a point of exposing the benefits of being barefoot. And I think the chap's done a couple of other things, like I think he walked 4 kilometers on Lego in a relay, completely. Anyhow, bottom line is she asked me to do this, and it took me about 3 minutes to go, yeah, sure, why not? We'll give it a go. And so we made the applications in November of last year, and there's a 12-week application process for Guinness. And it came through. She's the one who set the date for March, which in hindsight seems like the stupidest of months to pick. I would have preferred maybe April, well, not even necessarily April, but May would have probably been quite a good choice as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, she had asked me to do it. We did it. We applied. We both applied. I think she's still waiting on her application because there is no female record in existence. Whether their application process is longer or not. Mine got approved within about sort of 3 days of the actual kickoff. And so I've got a whole bunch of stuff that I'll bore you with in a minute that I have to then sort of upload to corroborate it. So it's technically unofficial at the moment. But we did fundamentally smash it by 11 days.
11 days. Yeah, I saw that, 11 days.
Yeah.
So what does that take out of you? Because obviously you're used to running barefoot and you're used to doing consistent mileage. What did you feel like? It was a massive pressure, or was it plain sailing all the way through? How would you, do you have ups and downs?
It's interesting when you reached out, I was sort of like, well, what's so there's been a couple of conversations. We have both had a lot of incredibly nice comments from people about what we've achieved, and I'm just a regular dude that was sort of presented with an opportunity to try something and thought I'd give it a crack. In terms of taking it out, I think once the first one was done, I was kind of like, all right, that wasn't too bad. You know, a couple of hours. It seems to have sort of worked for me in terms of time. There was no. I spent sort of an inordinate amount of time talking to people that would listen, predominantly my wife and nearest and dearest, sort of going, well, this isn't a speed thing. I don't need to smash the shit out of my PBs or anything like this. The whole concept of this is quantity and being able to push it out. So if it takes me 3 hours to do, who cares? I guess the preparation, I don't know whether it took anything out of me particularly. I'm advantageous in the fact that I'm self-employed, so you know I'm able to manage my time. But I guess my counter question is, do you mean taking out in terms of sort of energy and sort of the amount of running and all that sort of stuff?
Yeah, I mean, have you sort of got a routine of you run at a certain time of the day anyway, and it just slotted into that, and you just were then able to just keep that routine going, or have you had to shift things around to make it happen?
So I think, so the quantity, the miles that I was typically doing up until doing this was about 22 miles a week, which is fine. I mean, it would peak and trough depending on sort of what Sunday was looking like and how I felt about whether I wanted to go out for a longer distance. I generally, after we drop my son off at school, I go off and take the dog for a run, because obviously he needs to run and all that sort of stuff. So in answer to the question, it slotted in to that. It was just the time that it was taking was obviously going to be longer, and I think it was sort of preparation, but I don't think and it's probably to its benefit, I didn't think about how much distance I was going to be covering in the week compared to what I'd done previously. It was more compartmentalizing the fact that for this month I'm going to have to do this thing, and I'm going to do it. And I told my boss what I was doing. Well, he's not my boss, rather my partner, but the principal of the business that I'm affiliated with. I'd forewarned him of what I was doing. I would endeavour to try and continue my work. So there were a couple of days that I went into London, which is where a lot of my trade, I'm a commercial property agent by trade. That's where a lot of my business is. So I did it, and I'm typically only in sort of once a week. I had forewarned clients that I was working with, most of whom all of whom were particularly understanding of the fact that during the morning slot, I would probably be slightly unavailable. And once they got wind of what it exactly was that we were doing, and the fact that it was being done for charity as much as trying to smash a world record, most of them were like, okay, that's fine, that's perfectly acceptable, good luck, and where's your donation link and all that sort of stuff. So I think, does that answer your question? I mean, those are those sort of steps that I ended up taking.
Yeah, I think is, because it is an undertaking, and to plan to do that with you can't just, you've committed to it, and you can't just say, oh, actually, I'm just going to put that on hold, and I'm just going to go this for a few days. So, you know, mentally fixing yourself into that, and especially because that is a bit of a jump. If you're only doing sort of 20 odd miles in a week to then jumping up, you know, to your, what would you have been doing? 90 odd
92. Night worked out to be about 92 miles a week. So it was sort of a.
That is I mean, I coach ultra runners, and it's not something that I would recommend jumping from 20 to 90. But if you know, sometimes the human body and the mind is an amazing thing, and if like you say, if you compartmentalize to say, this is what I'm doing this month, then your body and your mind will do it. And then, but what are the after effects? Have you got any is there any downsides coming off it? Do you feel like you could just carry on and just keep the high mileage up, or do you feel like you're ready for a break a little bit?
So as a coach, I'm sure you'll probably understand, but and for the listeners that are interested in all this sort of stuff, that the only thing holding me back today is the fact that during the course of the runs, I got a cut on one of my on my left toe, that because it had to be exposed, so I would dress it when I got home. I would dress it when I got home, so that it was sort of at least had some repair opportunity. But Guinness on their credentials had said, if you're bandaging your toes, you can't. It's not perceived as being barefooted.
It makes sense. Yeah.
I mean, I think there's some points for argument. I pushed it all the way through to day 23 before it was just getting my wonderful mother, who is an ex-nurse, on showing the photographs, was like, you want to be careful of not contracting septicemia or something like this. Obviously, you're sort of running on what I lightly refer to as the tundra. So, you know, they are the area that I'd selected for my course was and did have, prior to my starting, farm animals, so sheep and cows and all that sort of stuff. So it's not it's not like a pure track, right? And you've got an open wound that any of these things could have taken. Anyhow, so the point is that I sort of I got that, and then I ran. One of the days I ran was frosty morning, so I was going into London. One of the days it was a frosty morning. It was -2, I think, when I set out, and I on finishing, I got some blisters because I then I warmed up my feet too quickly, so the temperature change, like literally on the drive back to the house, my feet were just pulsating, in terms of sort of trying to sort of balance out the heat transition from being really cold and sort of adjusting to dealing with the cold to then going into the heat. So I got a couple of blisters that then subsequently popped, because the following day I was then having to expose them back to the tundra again, and so they got quite painful. And it was only until, like, at least we knew officially that we were unofficially, but officially, like in terms of days, that the record had been broken. I was like, I'm not going to be able to pull this off to 31, because that was the commitment to Young Lives versus Cancer. I have to Compeed them or whatever, so the same, you can get some plasters that are similar to Compeed that you just sort of wrap and they'll allow your toes to breathe, and so on, those two. But I'd cut them down, so like 99% of both of my feet were completely bare, with the exception of these wounds that were open. And I'm like, well, I don't want to lose a toe, so I'm going to wrap these bloody things and have done with it. And if Guinness then turns around and says you weren't completely barefoot, you can sling a hook.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I think I might have sort of ad-libbed a little bit off the line of the question, but does that?
No, yeah. I mean, that is like kind of the nitty gritty of it, isn't it? You know, that was going to be one of my questions, was how do you pick a route for that, knowing that your feet are going to get, you know, bashed up?
Yeah.
I suppose the years you've been doing it, your feet are going to be, callous to a certain degree, aren't they? But if you stand, like you say, you stand on a piece of glass, that could be something that could stop you dead in your tracks. How did that affect you? The way that the route that you chose, and what surfaces can you run on, and what are best to run on?
So, I mean, I I investigated options. So there's where I live here, there's a white horse, like there's one of the white horse hills and all that sort of stuff. So I can run. It's a National Trust site. So I had in shoes had sort of investigated a track that took me straight up there, straight up this hill. And sort of round up and down around the hill, and then there's a nice there's a racehorse gallops that's not terribly far away from where we are. It was a nice sort of soft grass, not too much gravel exposure. So I'd sort of, in general terms, looked at that as being a good possibility, because it means that I could have just sort of run straight out of the house and gotten on with it. And the terrain variation was less likely to cause me any injury. But where I do run typically, which is about sort of 15 minutes from where I live, there was this field that is like sort of a massive, there's a lot of like sort of, it's like a bold, it's called a bold, I've called it, and I think it's referred to as the boulder quarry. But it's not a quarry in its traditional sense. It's been there for like 3,000 years. I mean, you've got boulders that run. I think there's some backlinks to Stonehenge, and some of the boulders have got there and all that sort of stuff. It is the most beautiful terrain, and it is sort of tundra-esque. So it's sort of you're up in the north. You're not too far from sort of Derby, but it's sort of like there's gorse bushes and all that sort of stuff around. And
Haberdashing,
yeah. That's exactly that sort of thing. And they pulled out, I think there were sheep that were sort of doing a circle, or they were being circulated around some of the fields, and I think they'd pulled them out about a week before we'd started, maybe 2 weeks, and I'd run there just to go and make sure that any course that was available would not have animals in it necessarily. Not that they would have bugged me, but it's just nice to know that I wouldn't have been sort of combating sheep or cows or what have you else during the course. And when I realised that was vacant, and happened to have bumped into the shepherd, and he'd explained that he wasn't planning on putting any animals in there for at least the next month or two, I was like, have it. That's sort of the nature of the course. And it is there is some gravel leading up to the start point, and there were some varying points of terrain that I was exposed to, but it wasn't too bad. And my thinking was, if I'm going to do this sort of 13.16 miles for 31 straight days, I want the best opportunity to be able to do it, rather than sort of trying to run with, gravel and all that sort of stuff. Vic, on the other hand, had a variety of different courses that she did. So some she did on tarmac. I think she did some in the forest, a couple of the hills up around where she is in Denbigh in North Wales, and all that sort of stuff. Whereas I'd sort of completely locked into just doing the same track, the same place and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, it was actually a friend of mine that actually sent me the link to Vic's running, because he lived, Mark Whitmore, shout out to Mark, mate of mine, who lives up there. He lives around that area.
His name I have recollection for his name for some reason or another.
Yeah, Mark Whitmore. He lives up around that way, and he said about it, and that's what made me dive into it and get in touch with you. So just thinking about the benefits of, because one of the things I like to do with this podcast is sort of dive in and get some real stuff that people will benefit from. So if anyone is thinking about having a go at barefoot running, what are the benefits that you see to doing it over running in the traditional shoes?
Oh God, it sounds a bit wanky, but I find that my feet breathe, if that makes sense. So the sensation of being, even if you've got a shoe with a wide toe box, that like there's a lot of talk about grounding, right? Taking your shoes off and standing on the grass and sort of gleaning the benefits of, I can never think of the word, but the neurons that you can receive from the planet and all that sort of stuff. It's supposed to be anti-inflammatory and all that sort of stuff.
Ions and everything, yeah.
All that sort of, so the ions and such. There is this kind of sense of doing that. I mean, like if you're running on tarmac, it's not quite the same thing. It's a man-made substance. It's hard as nails. It's fine as a surface, but it's not quite the same as sort of running out on the grass. I mean, I don't know, there's photographs of me at school as a kid running around like athletics day, completely barefooted. We've probably all done it to a certain degree or another. I just like the freedom of doing it. It's not something I do every day. It's once a week, maybe twice a week, depending on the vibe. And frankly, if there's snow on the ground, it's probably the last thing that I want to do, because it's bloody, I've done it, but it's cold and it's not particularly comfortable, and you have to manage, as I explained earlier, the temperature changes from once you have been out to it. But your feet do what they're supposed to do. So like your fingers and toes, they all move independently. They've all got bones and muscles. Like 25% of your bone and muscle is in your feet.
Mm.
I mean, that's not an insurmountable number. And so your feet have a lot more sort of dexterity rather than necessarily being encased in a shoe. There's a reason that we have shoes, and I joked with a couple of the people that came out and ran with me about it when the train was getting a bit funky. So that I'm not negating the need for shoes, but every so often just trying to expose your flesh to the ground, it's not going to kill you. I mean, you got to be careful. I wouldn't just go sort of pouncing off and sprinting like your fastest 100-meter dash, but go out for a walk and try it and see what it feels like. It's actually the freshness on your feet can be quite nice.
Yeah, and I know from personal experience, and the same as as all kids, like when you were a kid, you naturally just, I mean, I've got two girls, they're like getting to teenagers now, but
yeah,
forever like telling them to put shoes on, because to them it's just a natural thing to go out in the garden, and if things were differently, if there wasn't like bits of sharp stones and things on the drive, then if they were just running around on the grass, that's fine. But naturally, we've all got that inclination, haven't we, to stand with the grass between your toes.
Yeah.
When you go on the beach, if it's not scorching hot, you want to feel the sand between your toes, don't you? That's just a natural thing for you.
Yeah.
And I think that sometimes we probably, I'm fully behind the whole grounding thing. I've read books on stuff to do with that, and I completely understand how people feel that's something they need to do. And for me, as soon as the weather gets a bit warmer, I'm straight out on the grass with no shoes on, and I'm quite happy doing that. Haven't ventured as far as going down the trail that's over the road from me barefoot yet, but this could be the beginning.
If you tag me in it, I'll put you out.
Okay, I'll that's a deal. I'll try it. But I think it's something. I think it is something that we're obviously, and I'm going to bring this up, and I know it's a bit of a cliche, and you've probably heard it all before, but the whole Born to Run thing, because I read Born to Run, and straight away I was like, right, this is it. This is something that I want to have a look at, and I've got friends that did the same thing. And that book, do you think he did? Because there's controversy around it, because I've heard him interviewed many times on podcasts about how he didn't have this intention, did he, to make people all just chuck the trainers away and go and start barefoot running, and then blame him when they got injured. Do you think that when that book came out, I'm assuming that you've read it.
I have.
That had a positive effect on barefoot running, or a negative one, in your sort of opinion? That
it's interesting. I don't know whether I accidentally found the book or whether I was recommended it or what. But I think it was when I decided to set up the Barefoot Daddy account or whatever on Instagram. I was like, well, if I'm gonna sort of label myself as this, then I should probably read more about it. And I think that's sort of where it sort of daisy chained from. I have not listened to any Chris McDougall podcasts. I mean, we got Barefoot Ted to come in, and he has sort of liked and sort of had some very light touch involvement in the Barefoot Crew thing that we started. He's been sort of fairly engaging because I think there's a natural tendency for him to do that, because if we're all barefooting, then there's an opportunity for him to sort of push his lunar sandals to a certain extent and all that sort of stuff. I don't want that to be misconstrued by anything, but he's a part of that component. What my takeaway from the book was an educational pathway of where trainers are today. So the fact that Nike Air were created in 1962 because there was, there was no scientific grounding as to why it was just sort of, we should have a springier shoe because we can bounce off and we can create faster runners and all that sort of stuff. That's what I took away from it. And then the link to the Tarahumara Indians and all that sort of stuff, and the fact they run in sandals. I mean, I didn't think that there was the big. It's about your running style. So if you're in sandals or minimalist shoes, you're pushing off with your toes. You can do that in a regular. You can do that in a regular trainer if you so choose. You don't need to do this heel push. I mean, I'm not going to teach you to suck eggs as a coach, right? But that's my understanding. I've got a friend who has gone and shifted across towards a completely minimalist shoe style because she's got bunions and all that sort of stuff. She's learning how to run better because she's always been on the heel. She's testing out running on gravel because it sort of forces you to use your toes more, and they're slightly more adaptable than your fairly solid heel. And so that's kind of what I took out of it. It's more of a learning of a technique than someone chucking their shoes out the window and go, right, screw that, we don't need shoes anymore. I don't think there's any. That was my takeaway from the book. I enjoyed it. I found it quite a good historical record for running and the barefoot movement.
Yeah.
That's as much of a sort of a soapbox moment as I would get from it. And I think I read, it could have been an April Fool's Day. I'm sure I heard something that there is a follow-up to Born to Run. I think, did I see that the other day? You might have heard it.
About donkeys. Have you?
No, I've heard about the donkeys, but I haven't really sort of picked up on that. I'm sure I'd seen something on social media that he had been commissioned to write a follow-up to the Born to Run book because it was so successful.
Yeah. Surprised. But yeah, you're absolutely right that if you want, what I got from it is it's very similar to you, is that it was a great sort of story and a great history of shoes, and it made you think. That was the thing, that you just grow up wearing trainers thinking that you should have trainers and that, bigger is better or spongier is better, and just hearing about this tribe that don't use running shoes, they use, bits of tires and sandals and whatever. And what I got from it is that understanding that the human body adapts and can adapt. It can adapt to all sorts of different things. It can adapt to all types of training that you give to it, short, fast stuff, long, slow stuff. It can adapt to different diets. People can be vegans, they can be low carb, keto, whatever. Your body is an amazing thing that it can adapt. And you adapt to wearing shoes. Yeah. And people find that they adapt and they're absolutely fine, and other people try something different. And I think that I wasn't one of the ones that read the book and went, right, that's it, shoes out the window, I need to go completely. Because the ones that got injured, they've only really got themselves to blame because they didn't go about it in the right way. So I think you got a bit of stick at the time, and I think he's, from what I've heard of him on interviews, he can laugh it off now because it's been long enough that he doesn't really feel any pressure from it anymore. You're probably right that he is going to write another book similar.
It's very interesting you should say that, because I would have never sort of classed myself as an ultra runner, although it has been rammed down my throat by a lot of people, not in a negative way, but that having run 406 miles over a month, I probably am an ultra runner. And I'm quite keen on probably sort of seizing on that opportunity. And so I'm in conversations with my strength coach over the weekend, who turned around and was like, so what's next? Well, this is what's next. This is what I want to sort of build up to. Anyhow, the interesting thing was in terms of adapting and people adapting to a certain situation, right? One of the things that I learned from doing this stuff, and okay, I appreciate that I was doing the same course every day, is that I would mentally, I would have like gateways. I mean, they literally were gates through the course where I knew at a certain gate I would get to 3 miles and then go, oh, wow, that's only 10 miles. That's fine. I know how long that's going to take me to get to. And then because it was 2 loops coming back around. The other thing, so it's all those sort of little shift points. The other thing that I thought was fascinating, because I just finished reading Rich Roll's Finding Ultra, which I'm guessing you may have read.
I've read that, but it's on my list to read. Yeah,
it was fascinating. What I found to be particularly fascinating over and above the story, and I'm not plant-based nor likely to become plant-based, but one of the things when I was reading the appendix, when he's talking about plant-powered, which is this vehicle that they set up, him and his wife set up, and all that sort of stuff. He talks about what he did when he did the Epic 5, which is this sort of 5 Ultraman distances around on each of the Hawaiian Islands. He had said that he had a smoothie with a variety of different things in it. Like I think I finished it within a week within a week or two, or at least was in this section about these smoothies. But I said, right, well, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to have these smoothies. So literally every day of the entire marathon thing, I didn't follow him verbatim, but I had smoothies before I set off, then had half banana at the halfway point of the run. And that was enough food that I needed to get me through the sort of 2.5 hours. It was fascinating how, like, everyone goes, cram in carbs. I mean, I had carbs at the end of the day. So when I got home and fed up on, like, you know, my wife, we don't generally eat too much in the ways of potatoes and pasta in normal circumstances. She seized the opportunity with gusto, and it was like pasta every night and chips and mashed potatoes and all that sort of stuff. But it was those points of adaptation that the body was able to adapt to those and get me through those sort of distances. And there were some good and bad days, but it was fascinating how tiny little tweaks will see you through to something that you wouldn't have necessarily expected to have achieved. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that's something that I've kind of picked up over I've been running 20 years now, but of that, running about 9 years, nearly 10.
Yeah.
And that's, and over the years, I've tried every single different thing you can try with running, different diet, everything, and different training modalities. And that is the thing that I've come to terms with, is the fact that your body can adapt to absolutely pretty much anything that you give it. You could go out and walk 2 miles a day, and eventually your body just goes, well, that's easy. You could turn that into running 2 miles a day, and that becomes second nature. And then you build up, and you can change your diet. Your body adapts to that. People thrive on a vegan diet. People thrive on a carnivore diet. People thrive on all sorts of crazy things. And it's made me more of a rounded person. I don't hold any like hard and fast opinions on things now. If I've spent many years doing a low carb diet.
Yeah.
And that's something that's worked really, really well for me. But it's not something that I put in my header of on my Instagram saying that I'm a low carb coach. But if I've got guys and people that I train, and they know that I do that, they will ask that question, and I'll say to them, as a coach, I'm not recommending you do high carb, low carb, whatever. I would rather you speak to a nutritionist. But if you want to know what I've done and what worked for me, I can talk to you and I can explain what has worked for me over the years. And people try it. Some of them have stuck to it and love it, and some of them have tried it and gone, there, not for me, and gone back to what they were doing before. And it's just, over the years, I've realised that your body just can adapt, and it's an amazing piece of machinery. And that's another thing. That, do you think that people are scared to try barefoot running because they think that they will get injured, because they've heard all these things, these rumours based on some people that did get injured? Do you think that people are scared to try something?
I think pretty much that hits the nail on the head. I think people get worried about the grass, they worry about dog poo, and hurting or staking their feet. I can tell you for a fact that I did hurt and stake my feet. I was I'm tempted to, in the aftermath of this, take a photograph of my feet and post it just so that people can see what they look like. I have little me running around short of these cuts. I've never once run in dog poop, because you've got your eyes on the ground. You're looking out. You can recognise dog poop, whether it's not terribly difficult to identify. And actually, most dogs tend to do it off from the beaten path anyway that you're trying to typically run in barefooted. So it doesn't. I think it's just. I think it's exactly that. I think it's fear of something that's not societally normal. People do. It's not the normal thing. I mean, I as a barefooter, I occasionally look around and see or try to observe whether people are in a barefoot or minimalist shoe, just out of general curiosity. And you do see them from time to time. I'm not going to approach them in the street or anything like that, but it's quite nice to see that there is, when it hits the day-to-day, you know that there is some sort of a movement developing, if that makes sense. It's the actual taking off the shoes, and I think it is probably fundamentally driven by fear. But you can do it just by standing in your back garden. You don't have to, where your back garden, or it's safe, or you've got the facility to do it, and start there and see how you feel with it. I mean, it starts with that 15-minute grounding exercise on green land, basically.
Yeah, brilliant. So tell me about the community then. So you've built up this community of the barefoot.
So like I pushed the ball off the hill, right? So that was the only thing that I did. The four of us working collaboration. So it's called the Barefoot Crew 5K on Instagram. That we went through a phase during the various lockdowns of doing like a motivational Monday of anyone who had done a barefoot, like sort of a barefoot challenge. So there's a couple of them that had done the Bob Graham round.
Yeah.
You're familiar with that. So there's a couple of lads who have done that completely barefoot. There was a bloke down in Australia called the Barefoot Dutchman that walked, I think, the entire breadth of South, so Sydney, like Brisbane, Sydney, down to sort of, I don't get my Australian geography correct, but it was just down the sort of, I guess it's the northeast, the south, or whatever, one of the coasts of Australia, just so that I don't get myself into sort of geographical trouble. So he had done that, which was, I think, over 2,000 kilometers, and did it over 6 months. Anyhow, so we sort of drew out these people and sort of called them out. We were doing some we went through this phase of doing, and we still do, like sort of a challenge Wednesday. So what are the things that you can do with your feet that are good for your posture and all that sort of stuff. And there's a couple of like barefoot podiatrists. So there's one called Rena Harris over here in the UK. There's a guy over in Australia called Andy Bryant. There's a couple of others that so there's a couple of accounts called Gait Happens and all that sort of stuff that we've utilized, or at least mimicked some of their content to show that you can do it here. And some people have joined in and then tagged us in the posts. And then every Thursday, it is Barefoot Crew Day. And that's when most people go out and experience some component of going barefoot. So whether that's walking a mile or a kilometre, 100 miles, or a half marathon every day. That's sort of where it sort of stems from. And there are some particularly regular individuals that have joined us, but it starts with a guy, typically a couple of people in Japan, and then daisy chains all the way around the world and finishes up over in the west coast of the US. So it's not just fixated here in the UK. There's a lot of UK people that are joining us because it's sort of all of us are based here in the UK. But there's a good slew of Americans. So we've got some people down in South America that have come out and joined it and all that sort of stuff. There's people over in Poland and all those sorts of places. So it's just, as a lot of people have said, it was a community that was probably crying out for a community that no one seemed to seize on, and we just happened to, because of the mad lockdown, sort of saw this opportunity and latched onto it. And it's ongoing. And there's, say again.
There's a gap in the market, a niche, and a gap in the niche.
It would absolutely seem like, but it was, yeah. So that's what it is. We then sort of post about everyone who's done it on a Friday, and then we have a repost of the week as to who's done the sort of, who's really sort of pushed the proverbial envelope. But yeah, it's quite a nice, engaging community, and for something that a lot of people might see as being, it runs a very tight line to sort of OnlyFans accounts and foot fetishists and all that sort of stuff. There's nothing like that in it at all. Well, that's what people's perception when you tell them you're a barefooter. It's like, oh right, your feet blue.
Oh, I've not even thought of that, to be honest.
You would be surprised.
I will now. I will now think of that. Yeah.
It is a. There are some elements that come with it, which I think all of us have experienced to a certain degree or another, that are kind of amusing. And like if you look at anyone's feed, everyone is sort of interested in the running component. There's nothing salubrious about it, and it's just social media, man. That's what it boils down to. There's always sort of an element that you sort of
brings out the niche in
yes.
Definitely. So what's your ultimate? Do you have like an ultimate plan for an ultimate goal? Where do you see the crew going? What would be ideal for you? Have you got like a final plan with it, or is it just see what happens?
I would love. I think there's a lot of moving parts to sort of what the ideal would be, but I think a lot of it is whether we do meetups. I mean, there's a lot of insurance that comes with that, and people being barefoot, so we haven't really sort of crossed that threshold yet. Whether it is virtual events or something like that, there will be something that just literally the community is a year old, and so it was born out of to a certain extent lockdown boredom that has sort of seized its own voice, and so where do we take it? I don't know. For me personally, where does it go? I 31 days ago, I don't know where this seemed like quite a stretch, and it's one of those things. If you're an ultra runner yourself, I mean, like someone joked, well, would you do Marathon des Sables or something like that? And I had the pleasure of meeting Fiona Oakes. Are you familiar with her? Yeah. So I had the pleasure of meeting her at one of the Run Fest runs when it was down here in Wiltshire. I mean, like that woman does some pretty mad stuff for what, like, she's world record for 7 marathons on 7 continents, sort of one after whatever. She keeps on pushing. I think she's trying to win Marathon des Sables and was at least attempting the 4th one last year, I think, or whether it was this year. I don't remember which. I think once you sort of open the Pandora's box of this ultra running community, it's quite easy to sort of look at it and go, yeah, I think I could, if I can do that, could I do this?
Yeah, because I think one of the things that was not born out of the lockdown, but something that increased because races were cancelled, people started doing their own challenges, didn't they?
Yeah.
What's known as like FKTs. It's a bit of an Americanism that's been brought over here, just like fastest known times. And when we've always had that tradition, haven't we, with the Bob Graham rounds and the Wainwrights and all those things in the Lake District in Wales and Scotland. All of those things, just like the fast, a known time for doing things. But maybe is that a way that it could go, that you could have people that are setting challenges once you now the half marathons are out of the way, and then there will be marathons and an ultras. Could it go down the line that there's a record for doing the spine race, doing the Pennine Way. There's a record for doing that with shoes. There could be a record for doing it without shoes. That one I know quite a bit.
I'm just going to write this down. Right?
It's endless, isn't it? The possibilities are endless with it, because whatever you can do with shoes, in theory, you can do it barefoot as well. So there's
cards on the table, I did not know about the Bob Graham round until we did a couple of exposés of guys who had done it barefoot, and I mean, like the hills and dales of the Lake District. I mean, I used to walk them with my grandfather many moons ago, and my recollection is that they might not be ideal for completely barefoot stuff, and bloody hell, it gets cold up there. So, I've
done up there in the terrain. The terrain feels bad enough in shoes, around there, and even in the Peak Districts. But that's something I wanted to ask you about, is that you spoke about meetups and doing things, and the fact that people have done like the Bob Graham in barefoot. Do you think that there could be a kind of a community that could spring up in trail running? Because that as far as, in my head, I was thinking, how have you, when I was looking at your posts, thinking, have you done all these runs on trail? Have you done them all on just grass? Or has it got to be on tarmac, and does that absolutely trash your feet? Do you think that there's an ideal surface that people should be running barefoot on, or can it be completely varied?
I mean, I think the key is probably to have some essence of variation, because you're not running from point A to point B all the time on grass. You are going to get exposed to tarmac. I mean, like when I go down to visit my parents in Taunton, there isn't a natural course like the run that allows you to run straight out of the front door versus going off and driving over to the Quantix or something like that. And so I've run on tarmac at their house, like sort of three mile course. Your foot adapts to that terrain, so it might feel slightly uncomfortable to begin with, but once you get going, I mean, I've pegged like sort of a 7-minute pace on like 7.5 minute mile, not necessarily there, but on a variety of different terrains. I think the key for being, or if you're interested enough in barefooting, is some gentle exposure to all terrains. Gravel is always going to be horrendous. I mean, you've got the protrusions that can come up at various points, even in shoes, let alone being completely barefoot. So that takes quite a lot of getting used to, especially big trail, like, they're not boulders, but like you can get fine gravel, which is perfectly fine to deal with. It's just a matter of the seasoning of your feet, right? The more you expose your feet to stuff, the better they'll be to adhering to the various terrains that we have in our civilization, I guess. Is that the right word? But it takes time. It's not something that, I mean, okay, I've been a minimalist runner for a number of years. Barefoot, I'm still learning the barefoot way, as it were. The Case we were talking about earlier, who did the Three Peaks Challenge, he lived an entire year barefooted before taking that challenge on.
Wow.
I mean, that's a commitment, right?
Yeah, that is a commitment.
It's the walking through the supermarket completely barefoot again, to be able to I mean, that I think a lot of us have. I've I have no interest in taking my shoes off and walking through a supermarket completely barefooted. But he did it with that challenge in mind: is that he was going to have to deal with some pretty epic terrain, and so he needed to sort of harden his feet, and they do adapt, and that's again one of the points we mentioned earlier. I'm no expert, but that's my experience to this point.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. As far as one of the things I wanted to dive into is that when I hear about people going barefoot and wanting to try barefoot, it's because they've come up against injuries and they want to try a new avenue to sort of reteach their feet how to essentially work properly, how they should be working. Have you got any experience from your community about the efficacy of being barefoot? Have you got, like, not that there'd be case studies, or if you know of it, of people being more resilient to injury because of being barefoot?
I mean, I can only speak for myself, so I can't obviously speak for other people. That I had a case of plantar fasciitis, the delightful ailment that most runners get at certain points or another.
Yeah.
Whilst I don't want to, I think that plantar fasciitis came from having been in minimalist shoes, switching to the ultra, and the adjustment that I had to make in that different style of running shoe. So like the sole was a lot firmer, and so my landing, I think, bottom line is I don't think I sort of adjusted appropriately for that change in shoe, and so I got a case of plantar fasciitis, and I'm pretty certain that the physio, when I went to see him for it, was like, well, if that's the shoe you're used to, then continue running in that. And I think that's and again, I'm no physiologist or anything like that. I'm not particularly physiologically minded, but my understanding is that when you've adapted to sort of running with a lot more flexibility in your shoe, that's where the injuries lessen. I haven't had, the only injuries I got from doing the world record were the consistent distances, like sort of so I got a slight bit of pain on my left knee, so like an IT band issue, but I think that was attributed to the fact that I was adjusting my running style because of the cuts underneath my toes, and so I wasn't running purely.
Oh man, yeah.
So that's beyond that. I have not had a running-based injury for. Christ, I couldn't give you a date as to when I last got injured with it. But is that more me and strength work and all that sort of stuff, or is that the running start? I couldn't say that. I'm sure there are there are people that have injured this. I mean, I've injured myself by like kicking stones, landing poorly on a like a sort of protruding stone. I will say that going completely barefoot, one of the things that I've noticed a couple of times, sort of being without any shoes on at all, is like you're running across like a green space, and you've got rabbit holes and all that sort of stuff that are generally covered, and you put your foot into them, or you just catch the tip of it and you feel your ankle go. The longer I've been barefooting, the more adaptable I found my ankles being, that when I've done that, when I've landed in one of those things, I've adapted a lot easier. And it's just the legs are strengthening up, so it's all your calves and that's my experience. I mean, that's the best way I can answer that question, but that's my experience with those bits.
Yeah, I remember somebody sort of explained, I don't know if it was in that book, I don't know about, it's the wearing shoes all the time is the equivalent of like putting, like a plaster cast on your foot, and that you're not allowing your foot to move in the way it was designed to move, with all those many different bones that you've got in your foot, and it's designed to move in a certain way. And if you sort of are numbing those if like they say, if you don't use it, you lose it. Yeah. So you're not using that form of motion, you're your body will sort of dumb itself down, and which was when Hokers came out, and they were a big thing in ultra running with a big massive heel on them. And I remember going to see a guy in a local running shop and just saying, "What's your opinion of them?" And he was saying, "Yeah, they're fine. Good cushioning for your feet for long distances, but in his opinion, you sort of you're detraining your feet because you're dumbing them down. Basically, you're blunting those inputs that you would normally get from the ground reaction, and you'll probably find that although they're good for stopping you from having sore joints and sore muscles over long distances, over the long term, they're probably not doing you any favors. And if you go, and there's been a fashion, hasn't there, for minimalists, really like low profile shoes, go into the really heavy ones with with massive cushions, and then going back the other way, and then back the other way again, like we see with like the P-backs foam, like Nikes and stuff now, and all the carbon plates and everything. It's going that way again, but you still got that, not underground, but you still got the hardcore of runners that swear by like light racing shoes with minimal soles on. You've still got those people that are in different camps, and I suppose time will tell, whether history will tell what the ideal, because how long we've been wearing.
Barefooting, Sam.
Say again.
Obviously, barefooting is the one.
Yeah.
It works for nearly man, right?
It's the way we were designed, so we should be using our feet like that. Yeah. So that's great.
It'll be interesting to see if you can just see the warring factions either side. No, I want my Vaporfly. No, I want my sandal.
Social media. That is social media. The warring factions.
It is. Yeah. It is. I mean, it's. I guess it's each to their own. You ask about injury briefly, and you'd rather not hear of people injuring themselves, but there is a little part of me that goes, oh, someone who sort of turned around and said, oh, they've got an injury. Oh, what are you wearing? Oh, well, I'm wearing my Brooks running shoes that have got this sort of heel. And you're like, oh, well, have you considered minimalism? Have you let your foot try and adapt a little bit? But then, it's only in your inner monologue can you think that, because otherwise you're just going to sort of you'll alienate yourself.
Well, that's why I think it's good to have an open mind to things and not be fixed and opinionated on things. And that's another thing that I found as a coach. I would never say, I think you should do this. I think you should wear this. I think you should forget that product, forget this. If it works for you, it works for you. But be open-minded if somebody disagrees with you and says, have you thought about trying this? I'll always investigate things. But I think that might be just my nature, that I've always been inquisitive about all different things and trying all different avenues and things. So I'm curious.
Yeah, and there's an expression that I've sort of latched onto recently, which is know thyself. Right? It sounds really sort of pious, but I think you know yourself. It's like the eating thing that we were talking about earlier. And that if someone chooses to go vegan, how about it? Doesn't suit me, but there's shit in there that I quite like the idea of, and so I'm going to use some of that. And it's kind of adapting to suit your requirements. And say again.
Take the best. Pick and choose. Why not pick and choose all the good things out of things that you've come across? I'm the same. In my experiments, I tried going plant-based early on years ago, and realizing that I didn't quite have the enzymes in my microbiome to digest that much plant material, and the resulting. The results of it were known in the house, and my wife told me about it. So shifted away from that and having more of a balanced sort of omnivore diet. Settled those things, and even cutting, even further down with carbs has been a thing that's been beneficial for that. My digestion is the best it's ever been, but I like to have tried that. I can't say to somebody, you shouldn't be a vegan because it gives you bloating and everything. Because I've tried that and it doesn't work for me. But I've got friends that, you know, are full vegans and they go for it and it absolutely suits them. So I think, and it's the same with running, trying different things in running, try a different energy gel, try something natural, try something, you know, fully man-made, synthetic, try going with just water. I've tried all sorts of different things, and I've pick and choose the things that I know work for me and stick to that. But maybe that's just an age thing, that if you're in running for long enough and you try different things, you know what works for you. It's the same in life with the things in life, and the same as you. Like there's things in being a vegan that I absolutely agree with. You know, when it comes to morals and eating species appropriate food and just living a healthier life, because I would rather, even though it doesn't work for me, I would rather a friend be a vegan because I know that they have cleaned up their diet and they're not eating processed rubbish and sugar and everything. So taking all the good things from things around you is our thing. How did we get onto this subject?
That's really my fault. Sorry, it's going to move away from it. I think there was a touching on it only because of Rich Roll, and that is an ultra link.
Yes, Rich Roll. Yeah, I love Rich Roll. I do listen to his podcast. Yeah, he's a great guy.
Yeah.
And it absolutely works for him, doesn't it? You know, he's been doing it for a long time.
Yeah, very much. I mean,
I'll end our conversation about sports nutrition there, and if for people that want to get involved then with the Barefoot crew, 5K crew, or follow you, what's the best thing for them to do? How do they get in touch with you?
So you can find me. Instagram is generally my bag. It works. I'm on Facebook, but I rarely use it. If I'm honest, it's there there is a Barefoot Crew 5K community page on Facebook. It's the only reason I'm on it. So I'm known as the Barefoot Daddy on Instagram. The Barefoot Crew is known as the Barefoot Crew 5K on Instagram. And you can engage with us. So each one of us, myself, Vic, Case and Damien, all have access to the crew account. So if one of us can't answer the question, if there's some inquiries about barefoot running or whatever the component parts of it are, they will be there. Or you can direct message me, and I will obviously check my phone and engage with people as necessary. But it's not, we're not sort of soapboxing anything. It's, if you're interested and you have questions and you want to have a go, ask us. And if we don't know the answer, there are people who are I'm remiss to use the word there are people who have made this their career in terms of podiatry and all that sort of stuff, that they can answer questions on a far more technical level than ourselves. We've got strength trainers within the community that are very pro barefoot, have also got additional answers to questions that we wouldn't typically have, and it doesn't really matter where in the world they are, they will generally respond in the same way that we do.
So it's a great resource then for people if they want to find out more information about.
I mean, accidentally, but yes, that's sort of what we've sort of led to, because we are each, the four of us that run the community, and there is a dotted line to a strength coach who's based down in Israel called Sean Haber. We're all thirsty for knowing more about this sort of mad community that we've sort of fallen into, and the adaptability of your foot, I guess. I mean, like, we use them all the time, right?
Yeah, brilliant. Appreciate you coming on and sharing some of your knowledge, and we applaud you for your recent world record, and we look forward to whatever's next on the agenda for you. As far as
there will be something for sure. I think I think you'll appreciate. A friend of mine said, she goes, "Oh, I think this is not the one-stop shop. I think," she goes, "this will be the starting point for doing other stuff." And I don't 48, 72 hours after it's finished, there is a slight emptiness. Well, it's that commitment. You commit yourself. We started talking about it earlier. You commit yourself to something of that sort of magnitude that not too many people are going to do, and you're like, well, okay, I've achieved that. So where does it go from here? So yeah, watch this space. I don't know.
Yeah, excellent. Right. Well, we look forward to seeing what you get up to in the Barefoot crew in the future, and I shall be in touch asking some questions very soon about my own personal quest to be injury free.
Anytime, let me know. I mean, I won't answer you at 1 o'clock in the morning, but the following day, no trouble at all.
I appreciate that. Thanks for coming on. Appreciate your time.
Man. Thanks, Sam.
Cheers, mate.
Later.